Senator Perdue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Hall, it's good to see you again. I, for one, am excited that you are in your new role. You and I are taking on our responsibilities at a similar time, and I look forward to working with you. I've got several questions relating to this debt and the long-term forecast that you're working on. And I really would look forward to working with you on that, because I think getting accurate information in this town is really hard. Getting objective information is even harder. There are divergent views on where we are, how we got here, and what we need to do. To me, it's very simple. I just think that this debt crisis already is past the tipping point in several areas. First of all, I'd like to quantify rather, what this debt really is. We talk about the public debt being about $13.5 trillion today. The number I use is about $18 trillion because we've got those interdepartmental numbers in there. And I do want to have some clarification of that, and I really want us to get on the same page, because we're still talking about public debt as the $13.5 trillion. But when you talk about ultimate responsibilities, the interdepartment that we borrowed the money from, that's a liability there too. Social Security has got a problem. If we had a surplus there, I wouldn't be making this comment. But if interest rates today alone were at their 30-year historic average, if you use the $18 trillion number, now we're approaching $1 trillion in interest alone, or either current interest payments or deferred interest payments that go as an accrual. That's unsustainable. It's twice what we spend on our military. That's one issue. The second tipping point are these future unfunded liabilities driven, as we've said, by Social Security, Medicare, pension and benefits for federal employees, and the interest on the debt. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we don't solve it today, it's not going to get solved in the future. But then I think the third tipping point is Social Security and Medicare. Not only is it a long-term debt crisis, we have a program right now where we won't be able to meet the commitments that we've been making over the last 100 years, and that's a critical crisis in my mind. And I just want to point out, I think there's a lot of partisan opinion and comment on this committee and so forth, and that's all well and good. There's also a lot of nonpartisan, not bipartisan, nonpartisan opinion in here. Senator Warner made several comments. Even the ranking member and I agree on some things. There is no argument about the growth in income inequality. I know Senator Kane and I and Senator King and I have talked several times about there are things that we agree on. There are obviously things we disagree on, but one of the things I'm putting in the record right now is that there are no innocent parties up here, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Hall, for one, I want you to hear me say that. This is not about how we got here, but I think it is informative, because to determine where we go, we have to look at the mistakes we made in getting here. First of all, the Social Security and Medicare are major commitments that we've made. We've known since 1949, or somewhere in that period of time, we had a baby boom coming. But we had comments even in the 60s made, well, we know that's coming, we'll deal with that in the future. If you look at the last 100 years, we've had three political supermajorities. The first gave us a New Deal, the second gave us a Great Society, and third has given us Obamacare and Dodd-Frank. And I would argue that a lot of this fiscal catastrophe that we have right now, Mr. Chairman, can be laid at the feet of those three supermajorities. Now, the ranking member is true, is accurate in saying that in 2000 we had $6 trillion of public debt. That compares to the $18 trillion. That's all debt, private and or public debt and the interdepartmental debt, $6 trillion. At the end of the Bush administration in 2008, we had $10 trillion. So we added $4 trillion pretty much on the back of two wars that were not paid for outside the line items of the budget. Since then, we've doubled down, and we've spent, and since the last 6 years, we've spent $21.5 trillion, I think, running the federal government. We've borrowed $8 trillion of that. Therein lies the problem. We all talk about growth. I've spent my life in difficult situations in the business community dealing with how to work out a situation very similar to this, not with numbers this large, I will say. But we never were able to cut our way out, and we were never able to raise prices enough, or raise taxes in this analogy. We had to grow the business, and that means that we had to become more important to our customers. We had to educate our workforce. We had to grow our workforce. There are ways that we can do this. It seems to me pretty simple, Mr. Chairman. We've got choices to make, hard choices to make relative to our spending. We need to cut overhead in D.C., not the programs. I mean, we get accused of wanting to cut programs all the time. I want to cut the overhead here. Delivery of these safety net programs is really critical. We've got to grow the economy. There are simple ways to do that. Lee Kuan Yew talked about somebody mentioned the Singapore example earlier. They invested in water. They invested in cheap power. They invested in infrastructure. They invested in educating their workforce, and they created an economic miracle. In all four of those counts, today, America is lagging the world. And I'm going to come to you and ask for some modeling on what would it look like if we invested in some of those things and actually got results. But it takes priorities. We've got a lot of spending in Social Security and Medicare right now, and yet both of those trust funds go to zero in the next 15 to 18 years. We've got to change the budget process, Mr. Chairman. I know you and I have talked about that. Other members on both sides of the aisle are talking about that. I believe the gimmicks have to be dealt with. We've got to do away with the artificial sense of security that we build up through the budgeting process, through the use of corporate timing shifts, SNRFs, DNRFs. We need to look at these one-time funding issues with the Fed, with Fannie and Freddie, that's already been mentioned today. I won't take time and do that. But lastly, I think, honestly, this crisis has risen to a point that we are so far past getting political one-upsmanship on each other that this is going to require all of us to make tough decisions about priorities and how do we dig out of this with regard to getting the economy growing. Let me say one last thing, Mr. Chairman. I know I'm over my time, but I think it's important to counter an argument that has been made in here repeatedly, and that is income inequality is not a Republican-generated issue. There are no innocent parties on this issue. In my mind, one of the largest contributors to income inequality today in the middle class, and I think it's there, is the fact that we have fewer people working as a percentage of our workforce than we've had since 1978. Middle class net worths are down 19%, and in the last 6 years alone, we've allowed 4 million women to fall into poverty. So if we focused on getting our people back to work, that alone would help us grow this economy. Thank you.